In the 1990 Christmas movie Home Alone, if you haven't seen it, it's on somewhere right now. I'll wait. Okay, we good? Kevin McCallister wanders into a church to repent at the end of the second act. He's ready to own up to his bad behavior, that at least indirectly led to him being left behind while his family flew to Paris. While Kevin sits in a pew listening to a children's choir sing "O Holy Night," a strange old man comes up to him and begins a conversation. This is the scary neighbor from early on in Act 1, first identified by Kevin's older brother, Buzz.
Who is he? You ever heard of the South Bend Shovel Slayer? No. That's him. Back in '58, murdered his whole family and half the people on his block with the snow shovel.
The neighbor is now given voice to tell his own story.
Merry Christmas.
Similar to other scenes with adults, the camera shoots up at the old man from Kevin's sightline. This makes him seem imposing. But unlike those other encounters, this time the scene lingers, allowing time for the hierarchy of position to even out. We understand the two of them at this point to be roughly equals. As the conversation concludes, the man says,
"You better run along home where you belong."
Which reminds Kevin of the looming confrontation awaiting him.
Okay.
He has to defend his home from invasion and theft. What follows is, of course, the part that everyone loves. Kevin lays out a series of booby traps that the thieves dutifully fall into. Each one appears to expose Kevin's appetite for sadism. And if the plan was to call the police from the neighbor's house anyway, couldn't that have been done from the jump? Why the need for cartoonish ultraviolence, which in any realistic movie would have left both men mangled and bleeding profusely, if not dead? In the logic the film lays out, the answer doesn't seem so clear. The movie is kind of a Bildungsroman. Not really sure how you pronounce it.
Bildungsroman.
The coming-of-age story, like Oliver Twist or David Copperfield. If you've seen the movie, you know this to be true. When Kevin first surmises that somehow he's made his family disappear.
I made my family disappear.
Yes, that's what I said. His state of mind goes quickly from confusion to gleeful anarchy. He enacts Dostoevsky's famous meme. Quote. But as the movie goes on, Kevin's desire for wild excess begins to wane. As his instincts toward maintaining the home kick in, he in effect grows up. He changes from a lower-class slob pigging out on junk food to properly setting the dining room table for his last supper. One by one, he acquires skills that help him conquer childish fears. The basement with the furnace monster becomes just a place to do basic tasks. By the end, he is no longer the helpless youngest child. So if Kevin's development is the essence of the story, does the bloody, well, it should be bloody, battle that ends the film make any sense? Has Kevin just regressed back to his earlier state when, he was doing this?
1, 2, 10.
I would say the answer to that is no, and here's why.
This is it. Don't get scared now.
Kevin has in fact assumed the role and responsibilities of his class position. And above all else, the protection of assets, the symbols that identify that class position, is of paramount importance. Kevin is standing in not just for his family, but for the whole block of empty houses, which, as Buzz says, are part of
Most boring street in the United States of America, where nothing even remotely dangerous will ever happen. Period.
And who is now included in that group of class insiders? That's right, the scary neighbor. We'll get back to him, because he is absolutely the key figure. But let's say a little more about the McCallister family in general. We never learn what any of their vocations are, yet we can assume a great deal given the circumstances. A holiday trip to Paris from Chicago, flying first class.
He's giving us all this trip to Paris for the holidays so we can be together.
Yes, I know the brother bought it for them all as a gift. A house with at least 6 bedrooms, a detached multi-car garage, etc. The wet bandits treat their house as the top prize on the block.
And that's the silver tuna.
It's very G.
Meritocracy is hinted at as the dad, Peter, tells of his own modest childhood.
The only flying I ever did as a kid was in the family station wagon. It wasn't to France. We used to have to go over to Aunt Laura and Uncle Arthur's house.
Meaning he has risen through the class hierarchy. The classic image of them all together, barreling through an airport to the sounds of Chuck Berry, epitomizes their sense of petty entitlement. In another kind of story, these bourgeois characteristics would be played as satire. Don't get me wrong, we do laugh at them,
It's free, isn't it?
especially the kids, which are all brats.
Hang up the phone and make me, why don't you? The dope was whining about a suitcase. You're what the French call les incompetents.
Away! Get a plate.
But we're not rooting against them. The police receptionist is eager to pass the buck. The family services cop can't be bothered to do any more than ask pro forma questions while munching on donuts. The patrolman gives up because the house is locked. No one in the history of anything would behave as any of these people do. But we can go on with other examples. Catherine O'Hara's Kate screams at the airline clerk.
No, wait. This is Christmas. The season of perpetual hope.
Bourgeois frustration with the service industry is a common theme of Hughes's movies.
You can start by wiping that fucking dumbass smile off your rosy fucking cheeks.
In the opening scene, we see the McCallister children each taking a turn ignoring the policeman standing in the foyer. And then there's Kate's brush off of the utility repairman.
The power is fixed, but the phone lines are a mess. It's gonna take Ma Bell a couple of days to patch them up, especially around the holidays.
Okay, thanks.
The whole movie can be boiled down to a series of brusque or purely instrumental interactions between the McCallisters and people repping the working class underneath them. What this series of encounters does is make it much easier for us, as the audience, to paint with a broad brush. If the working class doesn't care about the McCallisters, even sometimes blocking them from their desires, it's easier to accept and enjoy the punishment given out in the third act as a cathartic release of pent-up frustrations against that entire class. So what about Kevin? He also has interactions with workers of various kinds, some of them minor, in which the lower class are identified by a core stereotype: the gum-chewing elf, Santa the smoker. But because this is Kevin's story of growth and maturity, 2 of his encounters take on the added weight of becoming obstacles for him to overcome. In the first, Kevin fails at purchasing a toothbrush because he is spooked by the scary neighbor. But it is important to note that even here, Kevin succeeds in evading capture by the inept local police. In the second, an alert grocery clerk suspects Kevin has been abandoned, but he outwits her questions, which suggests something about his capacity as a future professional managerial elite. He ends the interrogation with this snotty line:
Because you're a stranger.
A stranger indeed. And this is what makes the scary neighbor so important to the logic of this movie. We need him to set up the third act as something other than an appalling display of Lord of the Flies type sadism. Through Kevin's, and by extension our, sympathetic identification, the defense of the home is both broadened and deepened. Kevin is not a sadist. He is using his class-bestowed ingenuity to outsmart his class enemies in defense of his kind, and using implements of the working class to do so. Irony of ironies. The neighbor reminding Kevin to get home becomes, in effect, his affirmation of Kevin's class responsibilities, with the ends justifying any and all means. This idea is cemented further because of the class ascension of the neighbor. Remember how Buzz first describes him?
You ever heard of the South Bend Shovel Slayer? No. That's him. Back in 58, murdered his whole family and half the people on the block. With the snow shovel, he walks up and down the streets every night, salting the sidewalks.
The neighbor, even as a serial killer, was a common laborer. He shoveled snow, and that is his only identifying marker. Just like with all of the other characters, he was dehumanized, or rather a caricature of a lower-class deviant, like in the movie Kevin is obsessed with.
I'm going to give you to the count of 10 to get your ugly, yellow, no good keister off my property. 1, 2, 10.
But he is now a real person. He has a son whom he is estranged to. Kevin empathizes with him, advising him to make amends before it's too late. In the scene which mirrors the church scene, such mutual recognition of basic humanity does not happen. It's here, when our last remaining working-class characters come into view. Like with all of the others, John Candy's Polka King and his bandmates are defined simply by what they do. But in this moment, Gus relates something of himself and his band exactly as the neighbor had done. If you stop for a second and really listen, this is John Hughes actually saying something kind of profound.
John, you want to talk about bad parents? Look at us. I mean, we're on the road 48, 49 weeks out of the year. We hardly see our families.
The luxuries of the bourgeois class, even with regards to something as basic as raising children, are taken for granted. That idea is overwritten, though, by the morbidly humorous story Gus then tells to try and relate to Kate.
But I did leave one at a funeral parlor once. Yeah, it was terrible, too. You know, I was all distraught and everything, you know. Now, he was okay, you know, after 6, 7 weeks. And I came around, started talking again.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about this.
Well, you brought it up. I was just, trying to cheer you up.
Sorry, I didn't.
With an air of upper-class disdain, she shuts down the conversation. No sympathy is to be had, and we understand why. Gus was introduced as a crass, self-absorbed blowhard. He and the band are ultimately just a way to get from A to B and provide some levity along the way. They collapse back into being nothing but instruments. Hey, I did a pun to do the McCallister's bidding. And why do they not matter?
2,
Well,
we have
Buzz
smoke detectors. And
kind of
D,
alluded to
we live in the most boring street in the United States of America, where nothing even remotely dangerous will ever happen. Period.
They don't live there, and that is the only meaningful difference between them and the neighbor. He owns property on that street, and Gus does not. The neighbor, whose name is Marley,
he was a good one.
saves Kevin from the wet bandits in the third act. Kevin smiles triumphantly to see the police actually perform their prescribed function for a change, protecting the rights of property.
This is great.
Yes, Kevin, it is. It's really great. Marley's inclusion within the McCallister orbit, he's now an actualized bourgeoisie, leads to a reconciliation with his son and a happy Christmas with his grandchild. Kevin's gaze upon this reunion affirms the subtext of what has just transpired. Kevin has matured into his class role, and he recognizes Marley as one of his own. Marley's disguise made of gossip and rumor, the shovel slayer, the proletariat killer, for God's sake, has been shed for good. Not one, but 2 families have been reconstituted around their class position and by attributes honored within the American meritocracy. The McCallisters are simply more capable and have passed along that trait to the youngest son. The social order has restabilized where it should be. Of course, all of this whizzes by largely unnoticed. Hughes' true gift was in submerging suburban reactionary politics deep within humanist stories of adolescence and maturation. It was the 80s. But ask yourself, why is a story about a kid defending property on a suburban street the subject matter for a feel-good family Christmas movie? Why is Kevin's sense of being in jeopardy not more in question? Why do we assume the rightness of Kevin's actions at the end as being different from his behavior in the beginning? The inside-out framing, where we as viewers follow Kevin closely like another member of the family, makes the movie broadly appealing to classes of people who otherwise have very little in common with the McCallisters.
I'm a criminal.
We can laugh at Kevin's hijinks and empathize with his predicament. We accept his need to make examples of the lower-class thieves driving around in an HVAC van, committing non-violent crimes. We accept such Manichaean justice, even if we are of the lower orders also. This is the use value of entertainment as ideological conditioning. Home Alone works through and resolves class tensions by placing all of us on one side and thus sharing a common goal: preservation of the status quo. The class critique of Home Alone I presented here only has salience now. I'm making it post-foreclosure crisis of 2008, post-Occupy, and with re-emergent labor struggles aggravated by the COVID pandemic. So, the latest installment in the series adjusts to these changing material realities in order to arrive at the same end, a stable social order where the people on top get to stay there. The thieves in the 2021 version are victims of the gig economy, forced to sell their home. So this time the home invasion is just a colossal misunderstanding, and it all straightens out with a happy ending.
Oh, don't thank me. Thank that creepy doll. Selling that paid for everything. Our mortgage, our trip to Europe.
And your new chandelier.
Oh, and don't forget the drywall.
Class antagonisms are smoothed over because the Mackenzies are ultimately rescued and thus remain in a lower tier of the same PMC as the McCallisters of 30 years ago. But do we like having a Disney-fied sense of current events thrown back in our faces? The reaction to Home Sweet Home Alone has been mostly negative, both for critics and viewers. The story seems to play better across the class divide. Good guys on one side, bad guys on the other. So we'll all sit around the TV this year with our cocoa and watch the original instead, and root for Kevin to put those lower-class dolts in their place. Get him, Kev. Get him.